First story. A few days before Halloween of last year, when I was 16, my friend Leon and I were hanging out discussing our plans. Even though we felt too old to go trick-or-treating, we still wanted to enjoy ourselves and do something enjoyable for the holiday. We came up with a few suggestions, most of which were promptly rejected, but then I had another notion. I offered that we check out the abandoned farm that we both knew about, and I reminded Leon of it. We knew it would be exhilarating and eerie, just what we wanted for Halloween. Additionally, this was by far the best concept we had, outperforming all the others. Leon was thrilled about it as well, but we both realized that on October 31st, most others would probably be enthusiastic about the same thing. We decided to go out the night before instead. At an abandoned spot like that, we didn't want to take the chance of bumping into someone wild. All we wanted to do was explore and maybe become a little scared, then depart, which seemed innocuous. Leon took us to the nearby area on the 30th, where he parked on the street. After that, we left the car and strolled about the area until we came to a street that gave way to a gravel path. The driveway that led to the farm looked like this. The land was pretty much simply a big field of grass with a standard wooden barn and a one-story house. I'd only ever seen it during the day. Neither structure was visible from the path's edge. We started down the gravel driveway, our torches merely lighting up a few feet ahead. When we got closer, we could make out the shape of the home at the end of the driveway and the barn on the left. We figured the barn was probably completely empty and not very intriguing, so we were more interested in the home. We continued going till we came to a tall grass clearing. It resembled a circle made of short grass and dirt that surrounded the house. We went by some sizable farming machinery on our way to the front. They looked like some sort of ancient tractor that had been left outside for a long time. But I'm not sure what they were. They were covered with rust, even in the dim light of our headlamps. Upon reaching the porch, it appeared as though a sturdy wooden board had taken the place of the door. Every window and door on the exterior of the house was covered and sealed when we took a tour of it. Feeling let down, we made our way back to the front of the house and attempted to come up with another plan. We could see the walk leading up to the barn as we stood there. It was more of a line of compacted grass than a true path. We had nowhere else to go, so we made our way to the barn. When we got closer to it, something felt different than when we got closer to the home. It was only a growing uneasiness as we drew nearer. The big door was already ajar when we arrived. Leon and I entered together, me walking in first and shining our spotlights all over the place. It took us only a few seconds to be overcome by an awful stench. Not that it was too surprising, after all, it was a barn. However, we soon discovered another thing. There were footprints everywhere on the ground. Not what you'd expect, though, from other children stumbling around the area. From a single spot on the opposite side of the barn, they all moved in a line back and forth. Leon was clearly as startled out as I was based on the look in his eyes. However, that was the initial reason for visiting there. We moved gently, following the tracks to a wooden cellar hatch that was indistinguishable from the floor. A bright new padlock secured the hatch, and that was about the only thing visible besides the distinct footsteps leading up to it. Before we could give it any thought, the entire barn trembled with a thud. When we turned around, we discovered that the door had been closed. After Leon ran over and forcefully opened the door again, neither of us was able to find anyone. Terrified, we ran back to the gravel driveway through the long grass and made our way to the neighborhood where the automobile sat. Indeed, we received the scare we were hoping for, perhaps a little too much. Neither of us ever made an effort to determine the true events of that evening. However, after a few months, we discovered that the entire home and barn had been sealed off. We searched for an explanation, but nothing was made public. It is still unclear what was happening there. However, I believe we might never have left if we had stayed to learn more. Second story. This happened to me in the fall of 2018. I was living temporarily on the East Coast, just beyond the Appalachian mountain range, when I was 22 years old. I'll be honest, I've never been a big outdoorsy guy, and I haven't done any camping or other outdoor activities. Additionally, I didn't really have much interest in those kinds of things. But this was my last year there, which was also my favorite location for all those outdoor activities. In addition, I reasoned that since it was mid-fall, the weather was pleasant, the trees looked lovely, and I should try it out. Instead of going on a crazy camping trip or anything, I discovered a straightforward hiking trail with some nice mountain views. I prepared a little first aid kit, snacks, and water in a backpack. It was merely a little dirt parking space. There were no automobiles there. It was apparently not as well liked as I had assumed. After parking, I set out to stroll. It felt like a journey not many people would go, and it was serene. There were no obvious recent shoe impressions in the soil. It was merely a narrow walk with trees on both sides. The path became more and more covered with trees as I continued on. Eventually, there were enough trees to shade the entire pathway and block out much of the sun. In fact, it was quite pleasant and refreshing. But the farther I went, the more frightening it seemed to me that I would never hear from or see anyone again, that I was by myself, not in a spooky way, but alone. It was not a familiar experience for me. I saw a man ahead of me around an hour or two into the hike, which took me off guard. Seemingly just taking a break under one of the trees, he was seated on the side. I nodded pleasant hello as I walked by him, and he looked up at me but said nothing. I looked aside after he looked at me for a few seconds without grinning or nodding. I didn't know how to interpret it. Perhaps I caught him off guard, or perhaps he didn't hear me at all. I was not feeling well, though, because of the odd expression that lacked even a hint of a smile. For the remainder of the path, I walked a little quicker in an effort to get a head start on us. I slowed down and reached the end, which was a mountaintop overlook, after about an hour. The view was probably better at this time of year than it would have been at any other because of the fall colors on the trees. Additionally, generally, I was happy that I had taken the hike. I spent a few minutes gazing off into the horizon, taking in a view that I virtually never get to see. However, when I turned to go, I spotted the man from earlier standing directly at the end of the trail, and my heart nearly burst. I was maybe 10 feet away from him, and I never heard him approach. I found it eerie that he was just standing there rather than walking up to look out the overlook as a typical person would after the initial scare. However, he did something even stranger. His expression changed as he grinned and greeted me, inquiring about the view. Indeed, it's quite pleasant. Though I was still genuinely perplexed, I tried to be courteous and said, "You should take a look too." The man moved a little closer, then indicated that there was a better view down that trail to my right. I followed his point of view by looking over my shoulder. A little trail wound its way through the thicket of trees. It didn't seem to be used very much because it was brittle and vague. The man approached the path's beginning and stood at the gate, telling me once more how amazing the view was and how it would only take a minute or two to get there. I rejected respectfully, but he kept telling me how wonderful it was, to the point where it became apparent that he had ulterior motives beyond simply wanting me to visit and take in the beautiful scenery. I replied that I was okay and that I had to head home before making my way back toward the main route. However, the man moved his body quickly in front of it. I came to a stop in the middle of an empty forest, much more afraid now, wondering what this man, standing only a few feet away, could be up to. The man gave me a bland look as he gazed at me. I moved around him for a short while, hoping that nothing would go out of hand, and it didn't for some amazing reason. As I moved by him and along the trail, the man observed me. He never even tried to be discreet. Every time I turned to look away, he was still watching me. Luckily, he didn't pursue, and I successfully returned to my vehicle. I'm not sure what the man was attempting to accomplish, but it was most likely not something positive. What was probably down the trail was just a place where he could take me to a dead end so he could carry out whatever evil plan he had. Why he didn't stop me from leaving is beyond me. Perhaps his concern sprang from wanting to do something on the main trail. All I can say is that I consider myself fortunate to have escaped before further events. Third story. In October, our town always has this facility that opens up with a ton of Halloween and fall-themed activities. A massive fair has been built up on a farm. Although I had visited the place a few times with my family when I was younger, this was my first time going by myself, with only friends. When we were in high school, we decided it would be enjoyable to take a stroll and enjoy the Halloween atmosphere while laughing a little. We visited on one of those weekday evenings about 8 p.m. because the location was open late the entire week before Halloween. Though most of the families had departed and there were only a few groups of kids our age wandering around, I think we picked an odd day and hour. Still, we had a good time. We fiddled around for a while and played a few of the arbitrary games they had set up. However, a friend of mine suggested that we visit the corn maze. We all hurried in and made an effort to become as lost as we could. That is, until we divided into two groups for whatever reason. After 3 of them bolted in one direction, my friend Micah and I were left. There was no point in attempting to pursue the others because it was a maze. After a few minutes of going our separate ways, we began attempting to find our way out. We wondered how large the maze was because, in the 10 or so minutes that we spent wandering around, we never heard from or encountered any of the other members of the group. We eventually reached a breaking point and became determined to find a way out. When there were several options, we would divide apart to see whether any of them led nowhere, then return and choose the one we felt was best as a group. But Micah vanished at one of these arbitrary crossroads. I heard and saw nothing of him for a good 2 or 3 minutes until I heard footsteps coming down the trail. I waited for Micah to show up again, but there was something wrong with the footsteps. A big man approached me after circumnavigating the trail a little while later. Like all the other workers at the fair, he was dressed like a farmer. Overalls, a flannel shirt, and boots. He promised to escort me out of the maze and that it was shutting for the evening. When I informed him that my companions were also in here, he said that he had already shown them out, which explained why everything else made sense. I trailed behind him, navigating several bends and turns. Strangely enough, though, the sound of the fair gradually faded away until I could hear it no longer. I was wandering through a silent corn maze with this dude by myself. Then we came to a standstill. I came to a halt and observed the man making his way through the corn while yanking aside the maze, encouraging me to follow suit. I followed his instructions and walked through the corn, keeping close to him until it suddenly ended and became an empty field. Looking around, I saw that this was the opposite side of the town and fair, on the other side of the cornfield, and a car with its headlights off and its engine running was parked in the grass directly in front of me. My pulse rate began to rise, and I started to breathe shallowly. The man turned around abruptly and made an attempt to seize me. I was able to move quickly enough to get away and re-enter the maze. I heard the man pushing through the corn once more and coming up directly behind me as I ran back onto the trail. I started walking right through it all in an attempt to return to the fair and maybe find assistance there. The man never caught up to me, so it seemed to be working. My entire friend group was waiting for me at the door when I arrived. I'm not entirely sure what happened, but Micah said that when he returned to get me, I had already left. However, none of them saw the man, and until I phoned the police, they were little inclined to believe me. There were no cars or men in sight. All they could find were tire tracks in the grass.